So On the Rocks is it's written and directed by Sofia Coppola, who also did Lost in Translation. And I feel like this film is going to get a lot of comparisons to Lost in Translation because you have Bill Murray in this film, and it's not just that it's Bill Murray, but it's Bill Murray ambling about town with another woman trying to dissect their failing relationships. Very much similar to Lost in Translation. But it differs a little bit in that I think this is a much lighter film compared to Coppola's other works. Like a lot of Coppola's other films are a lot more, they're a bit more cerebral. They tend to favor a little bit more on the deeply emotional side. And this is a fairly light affair in terms of like a romantic drama. Now, the initial premise, like when I heard the premise, I thought this could go downhill really quick because this sounds fairly familiar of a lot of romantic dramas or romantic dramedies rather that tend to go downhill pretty fast. So the story here is you have Rashida Jones playing Laura, who lives in New York with her two children and her husband Dean, played by Marlon Wayans, and she's a writer, but she's stuck in a rut right now. You know, she can't quite bring herself to write something compelling. She feels, a little bit, a little bit haggard from a bit of the minutia of being a mom. Like when she goes to the school, she's constantly being cornered by these boring moms that keep locking her into these conversations. And she kind of feels like the third wheel in a lot of situations. In particular, she doesn't quite feel that Dean is very affectionate to her anymore. Like she's starting to see like warning signs that maybe he's growing tired of their relationship and maybe he's cheating on her and wants to move on. She doesn't think this for sure, but she's very worried about this, worried that there's something wrong with her because her life is so busy and that she doesn't really feel like she has that spark anymore. And so she reluctantly enlists the help of her father, Felix, played by Bill Murray. Now, she initially goes to Felix because he has a little bit of experience in this department since he did cheat on his first wife and then married another woman. And he's got some very dated and sexist views. Like the moment that they get into the car when they have their first meeting, he cannot wait to tell her about how men are programmed to dominate women and they're biologically driven to cheat and all these other dated traditionalists and very sexist angles that Laura just kind of just like sighs and shrugs at. She's like this is like the perfect encapsulation of that family member who like has very dated and sexist views that you don't really talk about that much, but you can't quite cut them out of your life because you know that they still kind of love you and they still have an impact on your family life. Because in particular, like I love the fact that like they do make Felix out to be a misogynist, but kind of the more believable misogynist. Like I had worries at the beginning of the film that it was going to be a little bit too cartoonish because he just right out of the gate saying, like men view women as property, just goes straight into that mindset. But then as the film develops, it seems that's a little bit more complicated. Like Laura clearly still has feelings for her father, and her father is actually pretty good with the grandkids. It's that very, that tough situation you're in where you have to deal with that family member who you don't quite feel you can cut out of your life because they still serve a purpose. And Felix kind of seems like he serves a purpose here. In particular, I mean, like the grander scheme of this film is that, Laura has to find, more confidence within herself and be able to have a little bit more confidence, but also stand up for herself. In particular, she has to get over Felix. She has to confront Felix and do a little bit more than just like sighing and eye rolling and just, prodding the bear. Like, she's actually got to come after Felix for this and have more confidence in herself. And I like that it builds up to there. It's kind of a little bit more hammered in based on the fact that Laura can't quite whistle. That's kind of a little bit of a metaphor within there. But I gotta admit, I kind of like, unlike Lost in Translation though, I liked when this film was focusing more on the central plot of Laura being concerned about Dean. Because it seems like there's warning signs there, but also, it's kind of revealed later on that, Dean is just kind of busy, and he makes some misguided steps that would lead one into believing that he would be cheating. And what I love about that, like, first off, Marlon Wayans, probably his finest performance ever. Like, he has that perfect encapsulation of someone who you're not quite sure is actually busy or whether he is cheating at first. Yeah, quite the performance. It's it's kind of like Adam Sandler. If Adam Sandler gets a good role, you can actually, oh yeah, he's actually a really good actor when he's not just leading a film. But I like that. I like when they're actually focusing on just Laura and Dean's relationship, because a lot of the asides tend to distract a little bit too much from the really compelling back and forth that Rashida Jones and Bill Murray have in this film. Like, I love their dialogue together, where they're basically clashing with, ideals of, traditionalism and modernism, sort of having these bouts within their conversations. That stuff is all great. It's when it finds these asides where a lot of dramedies, they would resort to this stuff heavily. Like, there's a scene where Felix and Laura decide to stake out Dean by basically perusing town and following his cab in this classic car. And of course, since Bill Murray, lets a little bit more of his eccentricities out as this film goes along, he of course floors it. He has too much fun in this classic, jalopy of a car, that it turns into, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's made this joke, it turns into the Fast and the Murrayest. And I apologize for that joke now that I said it. But yeah, there's all these like little asides here, like, and there's another scene where they end up trailing Dean to a Mexican resort, and I thought, man, they're just gonna get lost in all this like funny slapstick antics or just these crazy situations. Now here's the thing: even though this film is written and directed by Coppola, I feel like it has this feeling like it was a story by another person, with a dramedy and this premise that just didn't work. And it feels like Coppola just came in here and performed CPR and tried to revive this film. And she actually kind of does. I think she realizes enough which scenes work, because like I gotta admit, like the car chase scene, it's kind of funny, like a little bit like sweet at times, but it's so distracting. Like it took me out of the film for a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, this is not quite what I expected. But it does kind of bring stuff down to earth, I think, by the time they get to the Mexican resort. In particular, there's a moment where Murray is performing, when they first get to the resort, Murray is in the lounge performing a little bit of singing. And it's silly, but it's also a little bit toned down and subtly sweet. This is where I sort of see the echo with Lost in Translation, because in Lost in Translation, there's a scene in that film where Bill Murray does karaoke. And this is like the perfect moment for that crazed, loud Bill Murray to explode. And it just sort of like comes out in little bits and pieces to let us know, yeah, this is still like the same sweet Bill Murray, but it's not going to go like full blown Bill Murray. It's going to be that more, deadpan, pulled back Bill Murray. So like by that point in the film, that it's not going to go off the rails in Lost in Translation. And it's the same thing here. By the time we get to that scene in On the Rocks, I had enough faith in the film to pull it forward. And it does. It actually pulls it into a rather like sweet and contemplative direction. Now for some, I think because it gets to that point and it's more about, Laura having confidence in herself rather than just, outing Dean and trying to, reveal that he's a cheater, and that it doesn't lead into like the more like kind of detective aspects of this type of dramedy. I think it kind of works. I think it works here. Like I said, this is not the heaviest of material. It's fairly simple, straightforward, forward stuff that it almost kind of feels like Coppola, like I said, it feels like Coppola performed CPR on a lesser script here. But for what it is, it actually works pretty well. There's enough minutia within the characters that you care about them. The dialogue is pretty spot on here, especially for Murray being so blunt as the antagonizer that you can't quite bring yourself to hate. I think Murray's always kind of had that content where always kind of had that cadence to him, where even when he's trying to be the evil villain, he still has this kind of like charm to him that you can't quite deny. That it feels like it's like Murray has to actively try to be the misogynist here. I think I think it works really well for him. That goes for like a lot of films. Rashida Jones does a I think does a great job of portraying this woman who feels very unsure of herself and very untrusting of a lot of people, and it's great to see kind of that past that she has with her father kind of like come out in bits and pieces until eventually kind of bubbling up towards the third act where we get that great explosion that she has on her father. Um, and it just works really well. I mean I liked a lot of the characters here. Like it's fairly like there's no like huge laughs here. Like it's not quite like I almost want to say it's almost quite like deadpan comedy, a little bit drier. Except there are blatantly silly moments, like I said, when Murray's singing in the lounge and when he's riding around the car. So it kind of like walks that line between being too goofy for this type of material, almost kind of like where it feels like one of those like what's the word for it, like kind of like a screwball comedy at times. Like it almost gets to that point and then kind of pulls it back a little to show no, there's actually a relatable emotional edge to this as well. For the most part, there are a few, like I said, there are a few scenes that are a little tough to bear. Some that kind of like walk the edge between like how cartoonish is this for a father-daughter relationship, but it always feels like it comes together in some way. In some scenes, like in particular, there's a scene where Murray and Jones are just kind of like talking together and having a bout with like some people they know around town. But it ends on like a perfect note where they linger on a painting for a little bit and talk about what it means to them. And it's very brief. They don't go too deep into it. They just kind of like talk about what it means to them and what it relates to with the past. And then it just kind of like pulls out of that before it lingers on it too long. And there are a lot of scenes like that where I feel like it never lingers too long on moments where this could go downhill fast, and there are plenty of opportunities to, and Coppola sort of like narrowly avoids a lot of the pitfalls with this premise, that it works rather well. So yeah, I rather enjoyed On the Rocks. So for On the Rocks, 3.5 out of 5 stars.